Hello, everyone. Welcome to another segment of Black Op Radio. Today we have researcher Greg Burnham from San Diego. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Len. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to speak to you again. We've known each other for a while and amongst various researchers, and we get along. So that's something rare in this community.
That's a plus, huh?
Yeah.
You keep the ones that keep you smiling.
Yeah. Well, among other things, we both had a respect for Fletcher Prouty and John Judge, and of course with John passing and you meeting him and being involved with some of the things there in Dallas, I'd like to get your views and recollections of John and also of Fletcher Prouty. The anniversary is June 5th of his passing, and of course it's also the anniversary of the passing of Bobby Kennedy. And so maybe we can get all three things into an interview. But I'm glad for your time, so go ahead.
Well, thanks, Len. Yeah, it's good to be here. It's interesting. You reflect on your own life and you reflect on your own mortality, I think, occasionally. And as we get older, I'll be 57 coming up. They say it's the new 47 or whatever that's about. And I think you're around the same age. And, of course, there's researchers that are older than us and younger than us. But I think, you hit a certain age, your body doesn't respond as quickly as it did to things and whatnot. And you become a little bit more aware that life doesn't just go on forever as you were under the misconception that it did when you were much younger. And sure enough, folks around you, whether they be family members or friends, begin to have health issues and sometimes pass on. And suddenly some of the problems, let's say, that people experience amongst themselves in the research community, whether it's just minor disagreements or whether it's petty bickering, they just seem so nonsensical in the face of death and the finality of it. And so here we have our good friend John Judge, recently passed away. Is a person who dedicated, nearly his entire life to the subject of making our country and our world a better place, through his research and his dedication to holding conferences and community action on various things that were tremendously important to him, and I think tremendously important to us in the research community, and tremendously important to the average Joe, for lack of a better description. Whether that person is aware of it or not, John's contributions are extremely important. And so now that he's gone, any of the, like I say, the idiosyncratic things perhaps in his personality that may have clashed with idiosyncratic traits in other people's personalities, all those things just fade away and just really didn't matter at all. And it's a little bit too bad that they don't fade away when a person is still alive. But John and I got along very well ourselves. I didn't know him tremendously well, but I did get to know him very well, I'd say over the last few years anyway. But I was aware of him, of course, for a very long time, and sporadically we did communicate probably over a 10 or 12-year period. And but more so, like I say, in the last about 5 years or so. And I always found him to be extremely kind and very focused on what his mission was. And I think there's no way to overstate how much he did contribute to what we're all doing. And, his focus was not just on the Kennedy assassination, although that was probably, I would say, his primary or his first primary focus. But he also, investigated the Robert Kennedy assassination, Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and
the Reagan shooting.
Yes, the Reagan shooting, Jonestown massacre, and of course the 9/11 Commission work. He looked into that as well. Co-founded Choices, in I guess 1985 or so, and didn't want the military and CIA and whoever trying to recruit people in the high schools in the D.C. area. So, this is all really important to life in America as we would like it to be, and perhaps how we'd like it not to be as well. So I thought he was very courageous in that.
Now tell me about your last get-together was John. It was in Dallas. I met John I first met him at Fletcher's funeral, along with yourself and a few other researchers that were there. But I recently, face-to-face with John at the Surowect convention in Pittsburgh. I didn't go to Dallas, but you did, I understand, right?
Yes, and I, of course, didn't make it to Pittsburgh, which I wanted to do, but I wasn't able to. And, yeah, that was the last time that I had spent any time with John. We communicated since then, I don't know, half a dozen times or so on various things. And he was, of course, quite busy, organizing the event there. And, lots of demands on a person when you're attempting to do that. I'm sure that anyone who has organized a conference of that size, or even smaller than that, or larger than that, I mean, it's, this is not something that's easy to do. And at the same time, be a participant in it. It's one thing to simply organize it, which is a mountain to climb right there. But when you're also deeply involved in the research on top of the organizational thing, that's really challenging. And there's a lot of demand on your time from various people. Every researcher and presenter, obviously, that's going to participate there. Everybody needs probably a little bit of special treatment of some kind. And, of course, to the person who needs it, including myself, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you're the person in charge, like John was, and having to, juggle everything all the time to meet everybody's needs and try to accommodate what they will make them feel most comfortable to present, well, that can be real challenging. So I know we got a lot of help from people like Joseph Green and from Randy Benson and others. And of course, tremendous support from his partner Marilyn. But he shouldered the responsibility for it. His name was on it, and I'm sure he did the vast majority of the work. So the last time that I saw him, we spent a little time at dinner. We were sitting, I think we were sitting right next to each other at dinner, or real close to each other at dinner, and but we didn't get to speak too much because there was just so much going on at the time, and. What else? Of course, we spoke a little bit before my presentation and intermittently there, But he was quite busy and quite good at what he did and quite focused. So I was glad to have been able to spend this last November, there in Dallas for a couple of reasons, because it was the 50th and I did want to give my presentation. But I'm also very grateful that I was able to spend some good quality time with John, even though it was brief with him. I'm really glad that I was there there for his last hurrah.
So tell me, what are some of the contributions you feel John made? Because I know trying to put on a conference or this, like you said, kind of massage all the different guests with their different requests and needs, and it's almost a task that someone outside has to be. I think you need a promoter to just promote. Now, Deborah Conway was like that. She had it organized that, she wasn't a presenter, but she was, doing Lancer, and John was doing COPA, and I hear that Deborah is going to, I think because of health reasons and that, and I think because of the negative reaction the city of Dallas gave her, that they weren't supportive at all, that she's maybe winding up with that, and now with John gone, there may not be anything in Dallas, and we have Surowect, his son, may take over, but they're only doing it every so often, so it is a blow to the community. I'm kind of starting to go through a lot of John's old video lectures and that, and just admiring his wealth of information. And what are some of the things that you mentioned the Jonestown and JFK and all that. In fact, I don't want to go on too long, but he got a bit of criticism for that. We thought on the 50th anniversary, you should just focus on JFK when he was in Dallas, but he said, no, let's not forget the other ones. Mm-hmm. That to maybe some criticism from people in COPA, but he kind of stuck to his guns, and he wanted to make sure people don't forget about all. COPA stands for everything encompassing all these political assassinations. Mm-hmm. So, tell me, some of the things that you thought that is his legacy.
Yeah, I think part of it is John wanted everyone to have their eyes open all the time about everything, and to not, quote unquote, question your stinking eyes too much. If the old thing, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So a lot of these things that we see in government, and I know I'm being overly broad here, but a lot of the things that we see happen in government, or the snafus that we see happen through the media, whether it's intentional or somehow by accident that they're fed something wrong, or they're just reading from a teleprompter and it was deliberately written wrong for them to read. We don't know the exact situation. But if it looks wrong to you, question it. People turn on the news, whether it's CNN or Fox News or CNBC or whoever, they're all, or MSNBC, so much of it is the same stuff with a different slant on it. And I think that it's very difficult to discern what's really going on by turning on that and just listening to it and believing whatever it is. And I think John, represents somebody who never did that. This is a person who scrutinized everything that he was fed by his government, scrutinized everything that he was fed by the media, and didn't take any of it at face value. And I think that's something that everyone can take away here. I think that's a huge contribution, because you can look at so many of his talks and lectures and speeches, whatever you'd like to call them, are so worth listening to or watching for the content that's in them. It's just extremely rich content and extremely astute critical thinking in political conversations and discussions. But in addition to that, one thing that they all have in common, there's a theme that runs through them, whether you're talking about the Kennedy assassination or Malcolm X or Jonestown, when he was the special projects assistant to, Representative McKinney of Georgia. And, I guess they wrote the articles of impeachment for George W. Bush. So all these endeavors, the theme that runs through it is John Judge didn't take anything for granted. And he encouraged everyone to keep your eyes open. I can't remember, I think may have been Joseph P. Kennedy, or it might have been FDR. I don't remember which one it is right now. I should remember. But that said, nothing is coincidence in politics, nothing. And so every time you turn on these news broadcasts, this is all political spin. All of it is. And we know that the media has been infiltrated on several levels, pretty much across the board as far as the mainstream media goes. So it is incumbent upon us as citizens that we continually keep our eyes wide open and question things, not because we're paranoid, or not question everything because we are, overly cynical, but that we have a healthy cynicism towards a government that has repeatedly lied to us and a media that has repeatedly dropped the ball in their role as the watchdog over holding the government's feet to the fire in terms of disclosure to the American people and upholding, precepts of the Constitution that should be defended and held up. And when the government drops the ball on that, it's the media's responsibility to cover it. And we've seen repeatedly that they don't, and that the government repeatedly screws up. And there's a tremendous amount of corruption. So it's really important that we pay attention and that we don't run off half-cocked, with our heads, pardon me, but buried in the sand, and still our legs are running around with our head buried in the sand. It's like running in a circle, screaming there's a conspiracy, screaming there's a conspiracy. You need to pay attention so that you understand what the conspiracy actually is. You're not just running around, in this constant state of hysteria. That's not going to be helpful. So John had a very good way, I think, of remaining extremely focused on what was important, on the elements of the story that were spin versus the elements of the story that had substance, and what does the substance mean? When you take the spin away, when you take all that crap away, and you look at basically the facts, many times you have to look at them not as what they are, but what they mean. It's much more important to understand what things mean than simply identifying what they are. And so John, I think, represented a very sober voice in conspiracy research, in that he didn't run after every after every government scandal or after everything that looked a little bit amiss. He didn't run around with some new conspiracy theory about it. No, he was more impressed by doing what? By saying, this is not what could possibly have happened given the evidence that we have. And your government is telling you that it did. Okay? Now, I'm not claiming necessarily to know what did happen. What I do know is that did not happen, and our elected representatives are swearing that it did, but it didn't. We need them to tell us what did happen, and we need for them to do that now. And this is a very, very sober approach, in my opinion, to the subject. So, I'm kind of answering your question in a different way than maybe you intended, but I am kind of, it's hard to list it. In other words, all of the things that he contributed to, because there's a lot of them. Towards the end, he was even trying to work on something called the, Hidden History Museum and Research Center in D.C. to educate, the up-and-coming, youngsters in the next generation about, our secret operations in the government, and to support the work of researchers, along those lines that want to make sure that we don't end up in some, extremely totalitarian, fascistic national security state. It's really important. So, there's just a really long list of things that he did, but I think that theme runs through it all the time, that you need to consider things that are suspect, as suspect. When something's suspect, it's not okay to just say, oh, well, nothing I can do about it, and go back to sleep. And I think that's one of the main takeaways that I got, from my relationship with John. Was that. And I think, he was, he had tremendous energy because he pursued so many different of these separate things, and he didn't just do it on the surface. He went quite deep into each and every single one of them. I'm sure, he's human. He didn't have all of it right. He didn't have 100% of it right. But he certainly was quite capable of bringing our attention to things that needed to be looked at and needed to be looked at hard. And he had a tremendous amount of courage, tremendous amount of courage.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Fletcher Prouty, because we both had an interest in Fletcher Prouty, more than just a passing interest. He was another great personality. He had a great disposition for talking to anyone that was interested. Didn't have kind of a phony agenda. You'd write him letters, he would answer back. You'd start with email, and then if you got his fax line, you could go back and forth. And, all you had to do is show an interest and say, what's your opinion, Fletcher, on this? What do you make of this? Are these documents real? I'm researching this. If you have anything to offer, shed light on something. And he matter-of-factly answered anything that I wanted to know about and more. And I understand it's the same case with you.
Oh, yeah. And, he was so gracious and so kind and very, very generous with his time and patient. I know that you experienced this as well. Here's a person who is in the middle of it. He was entrenched in national security. That was his position, yet he didn't have to sign a non-disclosure statement, which was quite fortunate, so that he was able to talk about these things, later on. But even his anecdotal stories are just rich with, content that's really important. I remember several stories that he told me that were just asides, to the main topic that we were talking about, and they were kind of humorous, stories. And yet they were extremely, interesting, to say the least. So, I think that the relationship that I had with Fletcher was one that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. There's not a day that goes by that a subject or something that I'm researching doesn't come up where I wish I could pick up that phone just one more time and say, hey, Fletch, what about this? What about this? Because having that ability, 13 or so years ago and longer I cherished it then too. I will say that I never took it for granted. I always did really appreciate it. But when it's not there anymore, you certainly miss it.
Yeah, well, he passed away June 5th, 2001. And over the years, I've had so many people write me and say, I wonder what Fletcher would have thought of 9/11. I wonder what he would have had to say. I wonder what insight he would have been able to help reveal the fraud that it is.
Yeah.
And that's just one of those things. If you had one piece of information for someone new who doesn't know anything really about Fletcher Prouty, what would you say his contribution was to you? Is there one item that you can talk about to say, well, when I was interested in this topic or whatever, he really opened my eyes to something?
Well, for me, actually, there's three that actually are probably equal, and I'll keep them brief. But it's hard for me to pick, I think, between the three. One of them has to do with presidential protection details. I've worked on a lot of protection details myself, as you're aware. And when he revealed to an audience that the easiest way to take out a leader of a country, any country, particularly a country that their elite guard is trained through a private corporation, possibly several private corporations, that have gotten a contract from the Central Intelligence Agency to train the elite guard to keep that person alive. Assassinations are accomplished not because you have to hire necessarily guns to do it in most of these countries. Most of these countries, there are plenty of people waiting in the wings to bump somebody off in order to take power over. But how do they do it? The way they do it is they relax the protection detail. And for a person to be able to come out and say that out loud when he said that was a tremendous learning for me, simply because it never occurred to me that people weren't aware of that. People, for the first time I started getting the idea, oh my gosh, the way people really think that this is done is some ragtag people get together and get some guns and blah, 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 and create these miracle situations. And that's not how it's done. The way it's done is you get people to stop protecting the client. Once that happens, all bets are off. And so I thought that I learned a lot about what other researchers' understanding of what protection means to the president or to a leader of any country. I, for the first time, got a glimpse of how deeply shallow, their understanding of how important that is. I think Vince Palomara was one of the first people to grasp it. And I think when he fully grasped it, he almost did, a flip. All of a sudden, oh my God, the Secret Service did it. It's completely their fault, blah, 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 blah. And they're, Oswald killed him, but it's the Secret Service's fault. And then I think he came back and went, wait a minute. But I think up till there, Vince had not really grasped how drastic that situation is. I could be, wrong. Maybe he did, and I don't want to insult him by saying that, but I think that could be the case, So that's one thing that I thought was important for me, was to realize, okay, so when I'm talking to these other people and they're looking at me like a deer in the headlights and they have no idea what the heck I'm talking about, that's the reason why. They never got that part of this, that how significant that is. The second thing for me that's huge was the draft of National Security Action Memorandum 273 that you're fully aware of, and I don't want to go, into in depth because we've done that so often on your show. But the fact that the draft is written on the 21st of November, he sent me that document with no comment. He sent me a pile of documents, and he sent that particular one in there with no comment, on it. Just, along with the copy of NSAM 263, 273 final version in that one, and what is it, NSAMs 55, 56, and 57 for dismantling the CIA, and a couple of other things, right? And he wrote me a nice letter, but he didn't reference that particular document. And so as I'm going through this, I see that one myself, and I look at the date, and I go, wait a minute. Now, I remember him telling me about 273 being the reversal, and I've figured that out, and I get all, but what's this draft version here? What's that? See, that really got my attention because the day it was essentially 273 was written before Kennedy was dead. So here's the final version, here's the draft version, and they're almost identical, except this really interesting paragraph number 4, a big sentence, long sentence from paragraph 4, is missing from the final. And which one is it? Well, it's the one that's basically saying it looks like we're going to have a coup d'etat, and please don't anybody in the government blame an agency that you're not with for the murder or something like that. I mean, that's what it appeared to me. So when I saw the draft of 273, I got on the phone to him right away and I said, wow, now is this just me? But this seems like a huge smoke. And he said, I'm so glad that you called me because I included that without comment intentionally. And we had a nice conversation about it. So that is the second one.
If I can just add something,
Sure.
That was a kind of a trait of Fletcher that I'm sure he met a lot of reporters and a lot of people interested over the years. And so he would do that. He would send something to you. It happened to me on a different topic, but when it happens to you and you call him back and say, listen, this has really piqued my attention. This is important, yet you didn't say anything about it. Then he would say, now I really know you're reading what I'm sending you. All right, let's sit down and talk. And then,
Yes.
that's how he would really open up about stuff. So he would go to a point, if you just met him and wrote him a letter, he would answer your questions and go. But as you got further, he had more to offer, a lot more. And he was a rare individual in the government that spoke out about so often wanting to level the playing field after hearing so much crap and disinformation, that if you were a researcher and you were interested, he would send you stuff. And if you could key up on it and he recognized that you were in the right direction, he would even steer you further. But he didn't just, blabbed everything. You kind of had to do your homework. But once you did, that's the kind of trait of Fletcher. You get that little smile, that gleam. All right, now let's talk.
Yeah, and he would get a little excited. You could hear in his voice. He would get a little bit, just like, okay, you're paying attention. All right, you're paying attention. I got your attention and there was some delight there, and you could sense it. And I always felt good when I got that delight, because it made me feel good about me. It's I felt good.
I still remember. I wrote him back a question about this newspaper, and you know all about it. But anyway, it was about some dates and all that. So I wrote him back, Fletcher, this doesn't make sense. How can this be, right? And I was recording a band at the time, and it was a noon to midnight session, so it was, I don't know, halfway through, about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, my time, and then a call came in, and he goes, Len, it's Fletch. Are you doing anything? And I just said, no, I'm not, I'm free. What's up? And he says, all right, I just got your good note. Let's talk about this, right? And I remember the band were quite mad at me because I left them alone like for 45 minutes. I thought it was like 10 minutes, right? And they said, we're watching the clock. You've been gone for 45 minutes. So who's so important that you're interrupting our recording session, right? I said, well, I'll tell you about that later. But that was one of those moments where, you did good work and you're rewarded for your accuracy of analyzing history with someone who could actually correct you and then take you to the next step. Like, yes. I'm not just going to name names, but now that you're on the right trail, look into this guy. He would say that sometimes to me about, I wonder what this guy did for a living. You should look into that. And that was enough to say, okay, there's something here,
Yeah. And it seemed like Fletch never gave me more than I could chew. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to as well. He would test you, and I mean that in the best sense of the word, in a sense to find out where you were and how much you could handle, as opposed to, because you give information to somebody in the wrong sequence. Put it this way: if you give information to somebody prematurely, they're not ready for it yet. It's almost like giving them information in the wrong sequence, because they may take the information that you gave them and run with that ball before they have it in the proper context internally. Internally within their own way of storing the information. You've got to store it in a context that makes sense to you, the learner. And so just because it makes sense to Fletch, in his context of it, he knows what it means and where it is situated. If he just throws that data out there, well, contextually for you, it might mean something else, you may draw erroneous conclusions. I think he was so careful to not do that, and yet answer the question not as best he could, but as best you were able to understand it, and give you those, like you're saying, those little hints to lead you, to poke you in the right direction, and then you get yourself to that next level where you can now ask the right question, and he can move forward with the next piece of information. I think was a huge key to our relationship, because without that, I would have either lost respect for him, because I would have run into conclusions that I went, wait a minute, that means that, Jackie killed JFK. He would never do it. But you know what I'm saying? I've never run into a false conclusion based on something that he said. And I think that's largely due to the fact that he timed how much he would give me, custom designed it to where I was in the learning process, and I think that was very good. And it did accelerate, as time and years went on. It reminds me of trying to think of well.
Well, I was going to also say that he was on a radio show, I think with I forget his name, something anyway. Yeah, I think it was in San Jose, and the guy said, Fletcher, can you give us a name, and are you going to go too far? And he said, no, I think because I know the truth, I know exactly where the line is, where too far is, and I'm careful not to cross that. So He had his family, he had a pension, things like that. Because he had an insider knowledge, he knew exactly where he could go up to. It's not like he was taking a wild guess himself and, well, I think that this guy, might have something to do with it. But and he didn't want to name the names of the people he knew who had something to do with it. In the case that if there was ever going to be a trial, he said he and others would come out of the woodwork to testify, put hand there on a Bible, if it was going to do any good for the country. But for him just to name names and say that this guy did it or that guy organized it or for sure it was Alan Dulles and that's it, it wouldn't do any good because it doesn't solve anything. But if there ever was going to be an official record of this, then he would come. And the reason was the oath to his country, not to the military. He said he took his oath to the country higher than his military oath. Yeah, the Constitution. And like you also mentioned, he did not have to sign an oath of secrecy with regards to the CIA work, which is almost unheard of. So that's another reason why he has some of this insider knowledge that if you read anything on the CD-ROM or Understanding Special Operations, you kind of get this idea. He was there. This is the conversations he overheard and took part. He knows what's going on. Even in Oliver Stone's film JFK, when the Mr. X and Kevin Costner are walking along down in D.C. there, just having that chat, he's kind of educating, getting him up to speed. This is what we were doing. We were overthrowing it. People find it uncomfortable, but there's someone in every state named the executioner. If the court finds a guy guilty, they sentence him to death. A guy comes up and that guy could be a football coach, have kids, Boy Scout leader and all that, but his other job is an executioner. And he said this happens, that people find it uncomfortable, that people are trained for this, and they're in a camp outside of Greece. And, he said that, when people are called upon, when someone's got to go, they call these guys. And in the case of... little resort outside of Athens. So if you've subscribed to that, you can either take it or leave it, but what he's saying from his first-hand knowledge, that's a fact. And that he's saying when someone's too much out of control, a call is made and that guy's removed, it looks like an accident or whatever. Anyway, and it's assassination, and they have a patsy, and they have their own, the cover-up is the whole thing. So, like you mentioned, for you and for me, learning about how to relax the guard and that famous Anatomy of Assassination lecture, which is transcribed to a speech, is, again, eye-opening. It just lets you know that when you study these other assassinations, who are the guard that is kept there? And who trains the guard? And it's the Vanell Corporation. It's a CIA operation. So you say, who does the guard work for? So do they work for Vanell or do they work for the king? And when a call is made and said, you guys are going to stand down today. We have a few other guys going to take over for you. A few key guys, you should go on holiday, and these new guys will be fine. And then the king is killed, removed right there at the airport, shot, that's the glimpse you get into how things really work. If you find it uncomfortable, fine. There's not too many people who even talk about that. I couldn't believe that he actually, gave up the name Vanell Corporation. You start investigating it and you go, BDM. Similar like Blackwater, and then whatever they've changed their name to now, these corporations of mercenaries, that they're there. Yep, they're there. And I think, I remember when I even got Jerry Hemming, to come on Black Op Radio. This is kind of a blanket statement here. It's not, I don't mean this 100%, but close to it. Jerry didn't like anybody. You know what I mean? And when I told him that Fletch died, and I said, look, if you have any interest in coming on the show, and he, without hesitation, immediately said, absolutely, I'll go on. And he complimented Fletcher tremendously. And I remember him saying he was the first insider in the government that was actually somebody, up in the Pentagon that came out and talked about it, that spoke the truth about it. So I thought that was significant, no matter what a person thinks of Hemming, and Fletch and Hemming were completely different people. And I've often said that I got tremendous from both of them, and I did. But for two different reasons, completely different approaches to the same material, and oftentimes disagreed on things, I'd run things that Jerry told me by Fletcher, and some of it he'd say, he'd confirm, and some of it he'd say, well, and, Fletch was much
more kind, of course, than Jerry was when he would say he disagreed with something Jerry would say, and vice versa. Jerry would say, well, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about that. But the first part, I liked, and blah, blah, blah. And but he had only good things to say in the end about him. And so I thought that that meant something to me as well,
Now, also, June 5th is another famous, notorious anniversary of the death of Robert Kennedy.
Yes. Before we go there, could I share one thing real quick with you, Len?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
About Fletch, one of the last letters that I got from Fletch, I actually framed, and I have it hanging in my office. And it was July 13th of 1998. It has, his name and address in bold type on the top left-hand corner. And then it's a completely typewritten letter. And it was old school, This is probably a Selectric or something that was written on. And so you can see where he's gone back and corrected his typos in a brown pen. So he accidentally misspelled Burnham, and he changed the double H to an NH. And he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 typos, in a 5 or 6 paragraph letter. And so he went back in that old school way we learned in school, in Catholic school, where the way that you put the markup and you put the change and it's just great to see. It's old school. I really liked it. And then he wrote his home phone number in handwriting and the fax number in handwriting, and expressed how pleased he was that we were talking about the subjects that we were talking about. This is just it was just, I don't know, you'd almost have to see it to appreciate it, because it's like, yep, that was Fletch all the way to the end. His last couple of paragraphs, he was talking about having to spend far too much time with his doctors and their trade, but he took the time to write this fairly long letter and tell me that, we would always correspond, and he'd always answer my letters. So I just wanted to share that. It's just a good memory, very good memory.
Yeah, he had a great disposition. I think it's the best word I can think of for that, for sharing his time with researchers, to the detriment, I think, of his family. They did not like the people always calling from every country, the amount of letters he had to take up his time to answer. And when I went to visit him several times, there were stacks of letters that he had to reply to. He'd say, look at this, I got to get to that next week. And a lot of letters. And that's why I'm glad you got his fax line, because he said to me, listen, if you fax me stuff, that way I can just get up every morning and see what's in there, type up a reply and fax it back to you. That way the phone's not ringing here. A better situation. So that was a lot, because a lot of people sent emails into me for Fletcher answering the emails, letter of the month, things like that. So they would email to me, I print it, fax it to him, he'd have an answer, and then fax it back to me, and that was a really good situation. It didn't interrupt the family with constant phone calls and that. And then whenever he had free time, he would just sit down, and he did. He just typed on his own. I have a few of those letters as well myself. The little handwritten corrections. And
They're just good stuff.
So you mentioned just before we went on that you did want to also touch on Bobby Kennedy's assassination. For the rest of the month of June, I'm going to have on all the specialists I can have. We had William Pepper last week talk about the updates of what's new and what can you expect, and at least what is out there as actual facts.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit wasn't so much that, because I'm sure you're going to cover it extremely thoroughly. All of the details of the case and the again, bogus investigation, and you've got all the.
Well, I try to bring up points that maybe I've gone over before, but for new people, awful lot of new people tuning in. So if you don't know too much about the things, you might have heard that Saran is there, and then you find out the coroner report saying, well, he was killed from gunshots from behind, and we know that because of powder burns. Then you start looking at, well, how can that happen? And are there any pictures there? Yeah, Scott Enyart took pictures. Well, what happened? They confiscated them, and they locked him up for 20 years. And then when he sued to get them back, the court finally ordered them to be released. And on the way to the courthouse, the courier got robbed. You've got to be kidding me. Anyway, I'll let that speak for itself.
John Judge is rolling over in his grave already, Just hearing that story again, That's how people will listen to that. I mean, there's a percentage of Americans, right, that will listen to that news report or that, whatever you want to call it, report, and believe it, you know, and actually think, oh, well, that's what happened, you know. It's like that's one of those things that John would say, are you sure about that? Isn't this something you ought to look at a lot harder than that, you know?
Well, I guess Scott Enyart, when he had a lawsuit against the LA Police Department and the city there, he said, look, the Zapruder family got, I don't know, was 15 or 16 million for their film. I took pictures of the assassination. You owe them me back, or I want some kind of financial. You've taken these photos away from me. They're valuable. No matter who you blame for the murder, they're valuable. If the Zapruder family got 16 million, what do you think the value of my photos? I think he said he took 12 to 14 in a row. Click, 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 click while the shooting started. I mean, you know, it's all going to be right there. So when he deposed, you know, they had the guy up on the stand and they said, okay, you're the owner of the courier company. And then the prosecution phoned that office and said, what time is the courier leaving? What color car is the courier driving? What route is he taking and all that? He said, in my 30 years of running a courier, people only ask, what time will it get here and how much does it cost? No one's ever asked me what route is the guy taking, what color is the car, you know, these kind of things. So you either, you know, continue to be a sheep in this thing and believe these things, or you know, what's that famous quote? There's 90% of Americans don't believe the Warren Commission, and the other 10% are paid to promote it. You know, like the Buliosis and the Tom Hanks, these guys that are making money by promoting this farce. And if it wasn't such a criminal matter, it wouldn't matter to me. You know, some other debate is there actually can scientists make cold fusion or fusion in cold water or whatever they were doing a few years ago. There was a thing. I don't know, you know, agree or disagree, whatever it is. It's kind of up in limbo right now. I guess it's not really decided, or they could never recreate what they did. So, I mean, it doesn't bother me one way or another. But if you shoot Martin Luther King, you shoot Bobby Kennedy, you shoot Jack Kennedy, these things go on and on. You know, that reporter in Los Angeles for the Rolling Stone whose car mysteriously blew up, you know, after, you know, like, if you're not worried about that, right, you're next.
Yep, either that or the other alternative, like you just said, is that the person is paid. And it doesn't necessarily always mean what it sounds like. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, person X is being paid, say, by the Central Intelligence Agency directly, you know, to spread disinformation, as an example. No. It could be simpler than that. It could be somebody like, say, you know, Wesley Leibler, you know, who was counsel for the Warren Commission, right? And, you know, after that was all over and David Lifton began his long quest, which culminated, he's still researching today, but culminated originally in the publication of his book, Best Evidence, right? So here's a guy who spent a ton of time with Leibler, and Leibler apparently, if you read the book, you know, came to the conclusion that there was something drastically wrong with the evidence, and that's why it's named Best Evidence, because that's what Leibler used to, you know, cry about all the time, you know. You have to go to the best evidence. It's the best evidence. Well, when he was shown that perhaps the best evidence had been altered, and that accounted for this, and I'm not endorsing or refuting what Lifton's saying. I'm simply pointing out that Leibler, according to Lifton, came to the conclusion that there was a big problem with all this, to the point where he wrote that memorandum, and it went to all the commissioners, right? And it went to Rankin, and it went to everybody else, and he tried to, you know, get something done. And when he saw that that was not going to happen from that amount of effort, well, then he stopped, you see, pursuing it. Well, why is that? Was he paid by the CIA? I don't think so. Was he paid by Johnson or somebody? I don't think so. Well, what was he would have ruined his law career, you see, ruined his law career. And so here's a guy who had to compartmentalize stuff. You know, it's sort of like doublethink, right, in Orwell's book 84. On the one hand, when he was with Lifton, he was of the belief that, yes, this is a problem. The evidence, we were led down the garden path here, and he fully believed that. And yet his public persona was the opposite. He believed in the public persona that they had come to the correct conclusion. So he believed two diametrically opposed things at the same time and held them both as true. That's a classic definition of doublethink. And the reason for the belief in the Warren Commission persona was why? Well, because to pursue it farther would have cost him his career and his life. Not necessarily his life like he was going to get killed, but his life as he had envisioned it to be, you know. Now, I mean, I don't respect that at all, you know. I think that's a bunch of, copping out and it shows absolutely no courage.
Yeah, well, the people who write about him, there's a great new word. It's called prostitute. You know,
yeah, that's right.
They know something's wrong, but they write the article anyway, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy who was there to cover the 400 or 500 people that were at the Surroect, convention there, and then the guy writes an article about John McAdams.
Yeah, right.
You know, as if he's Don Quixote. The one guy up against the windmill. I mean, here's the one guy that's going to show everybody else is wrong. I mean, why doesn't McAdams have his own little conference and see 2 or 3 of his friends show up and that's it, right? So, so when you think about that reporter that writes that article on the 50th anniversary of, I'll pick a number, see there's 450 people there. I mean, it was a giant room. Everybody's seen pictures of it and you get the exact number, but a lot of people there. And, anyway, I like that name, prostitute.
Yeah, and I like the idea of McAdams as Don Quixote. That's pretty good because he really is chasing the impossible.
I can't underscore this enough, okay? Understate it, it's just, he sat by himself with Max Holland at the very corner, where everybody was there up front. He was ostracized. He looked like a buffoon. He looked like a disheveled Columbo. He never had a belt on. He had that thing. Even when we went to the Heinz Center there, he was by himself in a corner, and I was going to take a picture of him just go. Nobody would talk to him. He was a pariah. It was unbelievable. He had the nerve to show up there. At the end, a few people, congratulated him. I think Jim DiEugenio said something about, look, he's brave enough to show up here to see what we're doing. So you got to give him credit for that, right? Mm-hmm. But for all the disingenuous work that he's done and all the disinformation, I don't. In fact, there was a couple of times, I don't know how it happened, but I always ended up standing near him and all that. One time the elevator shows up and he kind of walks right in. I'm not getting in the same elevator with him. We're waiting here. And Mark DeVolk and a few others like, let's go down. No fucking way,
Is that what happened?
Oh, yeah. But no one, everyone there knew who he was. They didn't want to talk to him.
You're right.
A few people, went up there to, just to see if it was really him. They couldn't believe it, but, yeah. I mean, you can only imagine, right? So.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Just,
he. Yeah.
So it's who would go to the World is Flat Society meeting, Mm-hmm. So if that's what he thinks, right, that we're all wrong, why did he even show up?
Mm-hmm. I know, what was the deal with that even showing up? I get that. Yeah, I get that.
I'm sure his university paid for it, and it was some kind of research thing. He was going to be writing a paper on it. So like you say, you're not exactly getting paid by the CIA, but there's a grant there. There's a research grant for people who want to debunk conspiracy theorists. Here's, a $10,000 grant. Can you study what they're doing and write a paper on it and do whatever? And McAdams is always getting that, so he's somehow always funded with things. Those kind of things would happen without. That way he could deny, I'm not getting any CIA money. But,
yeah. Yeah. Well, he did on, was it JFKFacts.org? I think it's Jeff Morley's site. Somebody there, and I don't visit that site, not because I boycotted it, I have my hands full with my own forum and whatnot. And, but somebody sent me a link that said you might want to look at this, so I clicked on the link and it went to this site. And I was complimented by 2 or 3 people that I don't even know, apparently that had visited my new website, and they said they liked it, they liked the new look, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of nice, So I'm, reading down, and John McAdams chimed in, and he posted, quote, interestingly, Burnham is too busy tossing people off his discussion board. And since no long gunman people are allowed, this is fellow conspiracists. He bans links to my website and also the 6th floor museum. Narrow little circle there. So that's what he wrote. Okay, so which is really interesting, because none of it's correct. But he made a typographical error. He said no long gunmen are there. So I replied to this, and since you and I are such McAdams fans, I thought you'd love me to read this online. You know why? Out loud. You know why? Because the comments awaiting moderation since April 26th. It's been over a month, and they haven't put it up. So may I read this, Len?
Go ahead.
Okay. I said, thanks for the kind words, Ronnie and Jonathan. Once again, Paul Nolan, a.k.a. John McAdams, makes it up as he goes along. Reference to the McAdams website material is restricted due to its irrelevancy and to the disruptive nature of those who are engaged therein. Perhaps the old professor considers my having banned Ralph Sink, only one of three who have met such a fate thus far, inappropriate. Fine, except it is my forum. He may do a dance with the entire chiropractic community if he so desires. As for me, my hands are full enough as it is. And yes, discussion of long gunmen is allowed. There is some evidence that a handgun might have been used, but I'd say the overwhelming evidence suggests long guns, rifles, were used. Or did he make a typo? Yes, I see he did. I did not allow discussion of fantasy on the forum, nor do I promote the myth that there are viable arguments regarding the use of a single shooter, an alien space vehicle, William Tell's great-great-great-grandson armed with a bow and arrow, or any number of contrived legends, each equally ludicrous in their own right. Get off the court. The first-string players are in the house. And they didn't post it, and I just thought, gosh darn it.
They didn't post it?
They didn't post it.
Oh, fuck.
But,
that's really disturbing. Jeff Morley had this other article up there where he said, here's the top 6 examples of someone knew something was wrong in Washington. And he said, I had an article and was going to include Fletcher Prouty's name, but on, consultation with, I forget who, and Max Holland or McAdams. Anyway, McAdams. They advised me that Fletcher's got this, bad background and I should not take anything seriously, he says. I mean, what a crock of shit.
Wow.
Right? And it's just unbelievable. And for Morley to even put any credence, why would he ask McAdams, is this good? Do you think I should do this? I mean, it just shows that he has such shallow understanding of other research. He may be doing quite well in what he does, but, for him to include that, for him to keep saying McAdams is one of the best sites on the web there is just, I hate to speak harshly of him, but I have no tolerance. If you say McAdams is doing good work, I write you off. I mean, you just don't know what you're talking about. And either you're a buffoon or worse. And I'll just, leave it at that. If you use McAdams as a reference for anything, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes. Either it's an innocent error because you haven't been around long enough, you're a newbie at this, you have no clue yet, or something worse. But there's not any in between here. There's not any in between. No. And so the fact they wouldn't post that rebuttal, probably McAdams is having some pull there saying, quit calling me Paul Nolan, don't let people know about that. That's why I made the McAdams frequently asked question page, McAdams wants to go after everybody else. And it's amazing that I don't go to his website. Even our show notes, I don't link to anything on his website. And, I'll find my own version if we need something for the show notes. So, here's what's been really nice to me. He sent me a nice email when my site first started. He's never sent me an email before, and said, hey, looks like you have a great site there, blah, blah, blah. Send me something about yourself. I'd like to put it up and whatever. And they've talked, and I haven't done that yet. I just didn't get around to it, but I'm not sure if I ever will at this point. But, I'm
trying to be level about Jeff Morley too. I'm trying to say that, but when I've had these big arguments with, discussions. I'll say I've had great discussions with Jeff Carter on why we should include some people that we don't agree with. And he's, said, no, Jeff Morley's trying to do good work. He just may be mistaken on this. Give him a break. Okay, but I'm saying when you start a website and you call it JFK Facts and you come out of nowhere to say, I'm putting a flag down and this is the truth on the assassination. Here are the facts. It's my other criticism with, the other one, JFKMurderSolved.com. I mean,
right.
you can't have that, and say exactly what happened, and you better know your stuff.
Yeah.
And if I don't agree with it, fine, but, JFK facts. And you don't know who McAdams is? Well, he's been around for years and years. All you'd have to do is talk to yourself, Jim DiEugenio, Lisa Pease, Sir Owecht, a number of people who have signed my little statement. I've got a statement up about how people have objected to how he's tried to take over Wikipedia and bully his way through with what he feels are his facts, that Lee Oswald did it and everybody else is wrong. And it leads me to my other, statement of what the world is flat society, or people putting their head in the sand like an ostrich, right? You can't just ignore all this other information and keep parroting that there's a lone gunman, that there's just one gunman, and it's Lee Oswald, by the way. You just can't. It's 50 years later. We know way too much. So, the fact that people argue amongst themselves about exactly what happened, is it mafia influenced? Are they ex-Cubans? Is it Alan Dulles pulling the strings or whatever? Well, that's the discussion. And I think the higher road is to say that we are all still trying to learn, and we're trying to discuss that. Some people want to go too far and say, listen, I know exactly what happened, and this is the story. Take it or leave it. A lot of people leave it. They say, on several things, my mind's not made up. I'm still learning. I'm still, great. Present your findings. And if I don't agree, that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people have these varying degrees if they believe Judy Baker or not. I mean, if I say, I don't really subscribe to that, but I can't take too much time going into, and I don't know how McAdams, who's got his point of view, spends all his time on the other guy's side. Mm-hmm. Like if I have Black Op Radio or my forum or something like that, I write about what I'm doing. I'm not investigating him all the time, and I don't care. I'm no good to his website, and I would never join, that kind of stuff. When I was on some bulletin board, I think it was a long time ago, Alt JFK or something like that. I got booted out of there right away, in fact, the final thing that they kicked me off for was McAdams wrote something, and I said, well, consider the source. And he called that some kind of ad hominem attack and all that. I said, listen, you get your reputation there of being a liar, right? Mm-hmm. So, consider the source. If McAdams says it, you almost could think the opposite of true. The opposite is true. And many things. The people that McAdams endorses are probably on the wrong side. The guy he's really, against, like the Jim Garrisons and things like that, and Fletcher and other things, those are the people you should be, studying. Mm-hmm. And just the fact that he's, down on somebody is enough for me to say, it's happened to me once or twice. If I came across somebody I didn't know about, and McAdams is up there writing, the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's whatever. Oh, you know what? I'm going to have to, pay more attention to this guy, because if he's Irk McAdams, there must be something there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What I was going to bring up about RFK is, there's a real, again, I was talking about a theme earlier in John Judge's work, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a theme in an evolving and maturing theme, perhaps, in the life of Bobby Kennedy. Here's a man, a young man. By the time he was dead, he was still a young man. That started out as the runt of the family. And, went through so many changes as a youngster, his relationship with his older brothers, and then his eldest brother, Joseph, of course, died. And then, John was in the spotlight, but always ill and in pain. And so Bobby really took on this role of, kind of the protector of the family. His job was to keep JFK safe. And I don't mean protection detail safe. I'm talking about politically safe, to recognize enemies, including organized crime or political, not so much political rivals once he was Attorney General, because that would have been more, though, when he was running the campaign. He would understand political rivals. And then as Attorney General, being the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, he became extremely tough. And of course, JFK is probably one of his, if not his closest advisor. And after JFK died, Bobby seemed to evolve yet again. And his dedication to peace is probably, and equality, those two things, which in a sense, go hand in hand. Because when people feel equal to other people, then the chance of it disrupting peaceful relationships is no longer an issue. So equality really does contribute heavily to peace. And this dedication to peace seems to be what got him killed, in my view, and Martin Luther King Jr. killed. Because, and again, peace and equality, right? Because Martin Luther King, of course, was in a lifelong struggle for equality, not just for his people, but for all people. And his abhorrence for war, Martin Luther King's abhorrence for war and for violence, is very similar to Bobby Kennedy's abhorrence for war and for violence. And while he was the Attorney General under JFK, of course, he was, became basically the liaison between McCone and CIA, back to the White House. He oversaw a lot of Operation Mongoose, and Bobby became a very, very tough, a tough operator in that role. But I think it's evident that JFK was moving in peaceful directions, the number of times he mentioned the word peace in speeches and in press conferences and in interviews by the media, the word peace, peace, peace. He's constantly talking about peace. And if you note Bobby Kennedy's run for the presidency, it was all based on a platform for peace, not just in Vietnam, but domestic peace as well. And I think that probably nobody in the country could have informed a nation that was in turmoil. I don't think anybody could have informed that group that he informed in Indiana of the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. so eloquently and in such a manner that there were no riots. To my knowledge, there wasn't a single riot following the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. And I think that the speech that he gave that ended up televised all around the country, probably around the world, I think that contributed heavily to the lack of violence following Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. And I think that when, and again, I was, very much a youngster at the time of JFK's murder, although I was, very close to D.C. and attended the services, so it did impact me more. And I think that my family was probably a lot more political, let's put it that way, than many others, in the sense that my mom really paid attention to it, and talked about it, constantly. At meals, it was a subject that came up all the time, So I think that did have me maybe paying attention more than maybe the average kid, was. And the feeling was extremely hopeful while JFK was alive. There were moments of extreme fear. I mean, in the D.C. area, we had regular, air bomb raid, type of drills, and nuclear, attack drills. That was a regular thing. So there were those things, and there were the tensions because of Bay of Pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis and other things in between. Those tensions were there, but the feeling was extremely distinct that we had an incredibly capable leader. We had an incredibly capable president who was measured in his decisions. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction type president, This wasn't a president that issued idle threats, He said, "Ich bin Berliner." He did not say, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." See, a completely different approach. And he appealed on a level of humanity that I don't think any other president since has. And so that feeling of hope got just, obliterated on the streets of Dallas in November of '63, just totally, just destroyed. And in the ensuing years, Johnson, don't even want to talk about him. Here's a mess happening. Vietnam is a mess. Riots throughout the country, race riots in some areas. Lots of problems going on. And when Bobby Kennedy began to run, the hope that had originated in the Kennedy administration began to resurface. But it was a different type of campaign than Jack had run. And it was an entirely based on peace, entirely based on coming together, entirely based on the strength of the United States being founded in caring about each other. Now, I mean, this is unprecedented. This is not what political campaigns are supposed to be about. Political campaigns aren't supposed to be about that. And in the 60s, for a candidate to raise two fingers into a peace sign, like the hippies were doing, see, this was bold. And yet, he had changed. He had evolved. He had become somebody other than what he had been when Jack Kennedy was alive. Not that that person wasn't there all along, but the Bobby that was meant to be had emerged by then. He was no longer just, he wasn't just the head of the Kennedy clan at that point. No, that wasn't his role at that point. And he wasn't just the person to protect Jack or to get Jack elected. Now he was somebody that was doing what? Well, now he wasn't promoting Jack Kennedy. He was promoting the values and ideals that he held closest to his heart. And those were ideals that he thought would heal the country and that could possibly save the world. And he walked the talk literally. Everywhere he went, he touched the crowds. And he went to some of the poorest areas in New York and in Los Angeles and even down here in San Diego. The areas where, where the Cesar Chavez workers, So he had really evolved into a different person than he originally had been. And, or at least he evolved into the person he was to become, not the person that he originally, somebody different, but the person he was intended to become. And on, I guess it was June 3rd. So it's, what is it? How many years ago now? Oh gosh, 46, I guess it is, years ago. On this date, he came to San Diego. My family was living here in San Diego back then at that time. And he visited the El Cortez Hotel in downtown. And when we found out that he was coming, my mom, I was only, 11, 12 at the time. My mom got all excited, and she said, to myself and my one sister who was there, all right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get, placard board, to make a sign and some wood and blah, 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 and we're going to make a, welcome to San Diego, Bobby, or Bobby for president, or go RFK, or whatever, whatever it was she was going to write on the sign. So she went over to the local place to buy it, and she bought some 2x2, wooden sticks and placard board, and so we drew up about 2 or 3 of the, I know, probably not 3, probably 2. I think it was only 2. And so we went down to the El Cortez Hotel, and we were outside, and there was a pretty large group of people, and they were holding these signs. And so the driveway that exits the El Cortez Hotel at the time, they had these ropes, those like red velvet ropes or whatever. That's my memory of it. There was something there that was blocking you from going through. And we were a little bit back in the crowd. And so as his motorcade was emerging from underground, he was in a convertible. And so I said to my mom, I said, I'm going to go to the front, And so I started, I was small, so I was able to squish through people, and I kind of wormed my way all the way up to the front. So his car came up, and it stopped before it went out onto the street, so it was straddling like the sidewalk. And he was standing up and he was waving at everybody, and his bodyguards, they didn't have Secret Service, of course, back then. Candidates for the presidency did not receive Secret Service protection. So, in fact, they changed that law after his assassination. So at this time, he had to have his own private, protection detail. including Rosie Greer and a number of other people. Rosie Greer was on the Rams, I guess, at the time, the Los Angeles Rams. So he stood up in the car and he was waving, and his bodyguards, grabbed him and pulled him down and slammed him into the seat because there was, a high building around and whatnot, and I guess they were just nervous about it. And so when he landed in the seat, I saw my opportunity, and I lunged forward over the little rope that was in the way, and my right arm went into the convertible, and I grabbed him by the lapel and his tie, and he looked right at me and smiled. And it was just radiant. And it was only later that I found out that he had been exhausted and had collapsed on the stage. That he was at the, like I said, the El Cortez, I forget which room he was in, but he gave a speech there. And during the speech, he had gotten ill and basically kind of collapsed and had to sit down on the stage, and apparently, I guess, went in the restroom and vomited and spent some time in there, getting himself together, then came back out and finished his speech. And then I don't know if they had dinner or if they just left straight away. But he looked radiant at that moment, and then somebody kind of tapped my hand, away, so that I had to let go, and then they left. And I, never forgot that, and it just, that's what he represented to me, was that radiant smile, and he had this, it was just a very calming, I was all excited, I ran up there, oh my gosh, and there was just this, it felt really like a connection. And I think he had that ability to touch people and make you feel special, probably because he felt like you were, he felt like you were, and it came across, and then of course, the next night they blew his brains out. And so once again, that feeling of hope was dashed again, it went away again. And it was almost like there's a message being given to the American people, perhaps to the entire world, that there's no need to hope. There's no reason to hope. You don't have any control. You don't have any say in this. There will be war when we want there to be war. If we wanted peace, there would be peace. You don't have a say in this. And we will pit you against each other. And you will fight. And we will watch and we will profit. And wow, what a cynical view of the world that is. But it seems like, what other explanation is it? What explanation is it that Jack Kennedy's brains were blown out because his elite guard stood down that day? And what died with him? See, this is important. What died with him? This isn't just solving a murder case or finding who the perpetrators were. Obviously, they got away with it, so you can't even prosecute them. But what died with them? Was it really JFK that they were killing, or was it an ideal? And Martin Luther King, see? Were they trying to kill him? It's easy if you have a patsy, It's easy to blame a single guy, because you can say, hey, who can know the mind of the insane, or the disturbed? Or as Richard Russell described to LBJ when he was talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, a generally misanthropic individual. Say, well, who can know the mind of a lone nut, generally misanthropic person? And so when you pin it on them, you don't have to know what else they killed, because they were just a nut trying to kill that guy. And they killed all this other stuff, but that's just a side event. See, well, and
one common thread was they were all against the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Well, what I'm asserting here, is that they weren't killing the individual. They were killing the ideal. They were killing the approach that these people were taking. They were killing the way that these people were giving individuals back their freedoms of choice. They were giving individuals back their liberty. They were identifying where the liberty resides. Liberty resides inside the individual. It is not a gift that is granted by a government to the governed. No. Our Constitution even says it in it, and whether a person believes in God or they don't, the idea is the same when it says basically that, these things are self-evident, and these are not bestowed by a government. These are God-given rights, They're not bestowed by a government, and so a government can't take them away. And these individuals were pointing that out. They were empowering the individual to embrace their own liberty. And the way that you embrace your own liberty is you get along with each other. Don't you see? If you get along with each other, that's your liberty. That's your liberty. And I think that's the message that was murdered in Dallas, that was murdered in Memphis, that was murdered in Los Angeles, was the idea that you own your liberty. You own your liberty. And I think for me anyway, that's why I do what I do, Len. That's why I continue the research that I do, because we have the ability to have those feelings today if we choose to have them. The way that we were inspired by JFK and Martin Luther King and RFK, the way that we were inspired by them, you see, that still exists within us, but we have to have the courage to bring it out and to live that way. And what John Judge stood for, and what Fletcher Prouty stood for, and what George Michael Ivica stood for, these are things that when they inspired us, that means that, well, we've already got that in us. We've already got that, and we need to step forward with that. And so I know that in my life I haven't done it to the degree that I wish that I had, and hopefully I'll make some corrections to that, and realize it. There's somebody on our forum, Jim Hackett, that writes, "Be the change," be the change. And I think it's a real good sentiment.
Yeah, hats off to Jim Hackett. He's been writing and listening for years, and he's always got good things to say.
Yeah, Jim. In fact, remember you met him in Encinitas because he came to our conference at the Encinitas conference. He was there as well. Yeah. So, but that's what I wanted to mention about RFK. My anecdotal experience, with him, and also the what I thought he was, the direction he was leading the country in.
Okay, thanks so much, Craig, for taking time to share that. Do you want to mention your website again?
Oh, thank you, Len. I would. Yeah, my website is assassinationofjfk.net. It's not www. It says HTTP : and assassinationofjfk.net, and Assassination of JFK Forum can be accessed through the main site at assassinationofjfk.net. I would also like to point out that we have a lot of really good contributors. Len, we've only been in existence, I think, a little bit less than 3 months, and we've got about going on 160 members, and a few thousand posts so far, and some good content, some good discussion. And so I invite folks that are listening to come, and you can just read if you'd like. You won't be able to post if you don't actually apply for membership and join. But you can read what's there to see if it's of your liking and your taste. And if you'd like to contribute, you're more than welcome to join that as well. And something that's really kind of good, we have a number of experts in different fields there. And in fact, just this morning, a question came up about Tom Wilson's work of photonics, and I was able to have John Costella, who's a founding member with me of the forum. I just sent him an email and said, "Can you reply to this?" Because he's an expert in the properties of light. He's a physicist, and so it's kind of nice, to have an expert like that be able to come on and give his opinion on some of this work. And of course, David Mantic is also a founding member. He's an MD and specializes in radiology, oncology, and he's also a physicist on top of it too. So having some of these experts, Doug Horn is there, Phil Dragoo's there, Charles Drago, Adele Edison as well. So these are folks that really do have a lot of expertise. And of course, there's so many more that I haven't named that are on that are tremendous. But it's really good to have them there because you can get some expert opinion. It doesn't mean they're always right, but at least you can get their opinion on some things as well. So, and then finally, I want to also mention, Len, to the audience, don't take this for granted, folks. Len, what you do is extremely important. It's not easy to do. It's time-consuming. You've got to do your homework, and you've got to be schooled on a multitude of subjects because you cover a really broad variety of things with your guests, when you're on, when they're on. And so, no one should take this for granted. This resource is really important, and it needs support as well. And so I encourage people to support it in any way that they can, because it really is, it's important.
Well, thanks, Greg, and I also
you're welcome,
I'll take this time to make a small request for donations that people like to show. I say, the $1 a show, that'd be $52 a year. You get 52 shows, and if anyone can afford a donation, they like this kind of stuff that Black Op is doing and want to support it, I appreciate that. One new thing, we've got a few new things coming up for the future, but one is that due to the lack of respect that Wikipedia shows for honest research in something less, in the case of Jim Garrison, or the facts of Oliver Stone's film, or in Fletcher Prouty, I have started a new Proutypedia, and Proutypedia.com is going to be online very soon. I mean, it's online right now, but we're getting requests for people to contribute, and peer-reviewed research will be posted there. And right now, I had Wikipedia. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but you're not even allowed to make a link to Prouty.org. They said Prouty.org is not actually a real site, and it's just a joke. The research that McAdams and his minions try to perpetrate on what true facts are for an encyclopedia. So with Fletcher dead, no one can speak for him. I started the website for Fletcher while he was alive. He answered email there. He posted a monthly commentary for the last year of his life, I think. Those emails that people wrote in and replied to, and there are, of course, Fletcher Prouty.org is everything Prouty. And that's where I posted articles, letters, email, everything I could. And that's, if you're looking for Prouty, don't go to the Wikipedia page and think that you're going to find stuff. Even the page, the talk page where people were arguing back and forth, it's saying, how can you delete this? How can you take this down? You're not allowing a link. That whole 5 years of however long, I think I started complaining back in 2005, and once a year I'd go there and I'd make a complaint, try to correct some stuff, and then be, banned for, they called it vandalism. They allow the John McAdams site that says Prouty Truth Teller or Crackpot, but they don't allow a link to Fletcher Prouty, Prouty.org. They say, no, it's not. I think one of the quotes was, it's a fan site, Oh, my God, So, anyway, Proutypedia.org is up, and you're going to be able to find everything about Fletcher Prouty. You're going to be able to find the true facts of Oliver Stone. He's contributing, and through him and a few writers, they're going to post up a real wiki about everything about the JFK film, the true facts, and then also we're going to have a few other things, true history, Bay of Pigs, other articles that people can submit, and like I say, not just be McAdams, not just be the lone nut. And what did he call your article? Very narrow window. It's the other way around. Everyone is researching this, and no one believes McAdams stuff unless they're paid to. But people who actually start studying all of the things that Jim Garrison dug up, all the inconsistencies with the Warren Commission, then the obfuscation of it, then the covering up, and then the fraud of it. And once you get a handle on that, you start wondering, well, is the same thing true with Bobby Kennedy's assassination? Or in Martin Luther King, they found a duffel bag with his, his radio and his, some ID there to tie him to the crime, but they dropped it off 10 minutes before the I mean, what's going on? How could they find the rifle? It's just crazy. And then you could even talk about 9/11 and the fraud of that, So, you get a good understanding, I think, of history from studying the JFK assassination. And you see what the Warren Commission put out as an official government investigation, and then when you discover the facts, you're left with a Gary Mack or a Max Holland or Posner trying to defend the indefensible with every kind of trick they can, but not any logic.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting too. Wikipedia hasn't been around as long as Prouty.org. The site that you started with Fletcher Prouty while he was allowed started, 96, 97, 98?
Yeah, we'd have to go back and just see because the letters are dated. When I got an email in from someone, I just printed the email. You know, and then.
But it was like mid '90s, right? Mid to late '90s.
Yeah, well, it would have to have been after '95. But
yeah.
But anyway, I can find out the date if I had to. But that reminds me that you were on Wikipedia.
Wikipedia was started in 2001.
Yeah.
So
yeah, probably to combat 9/11, you know, information they wanted to. But anyway, you know what I'm saying is that you were one of the contributors to the talk page, I believe, that's been deleted now, where you said, how can you do this? This is totally illogical for you to allow McAdams there, but disallow anything to Prouty, in his own words.
Yeah. Yeah, they really... there's an agenda. I mean, there's no question about it. That was the most ridiculous talk page I've ever read in my life. The person who is responsible for that censorship, it's just incredible to read what they were writing. It absolutely made no sense at all, you know. But I will have the my Bay of Pigs contribution to Proutypedia completed in the near future. I'm just, it's going to be a lot more in depth than I think what I've done before, because it's such a big subject, you know, and,
well, it can be an ongoing thing. I mean, I appreciate if you post something and then a month later add something, or a year later add something, which any encyclopedia could grow as more, you know, documents are released and we find out more and more things. We can say, here's the true story on an event, and here's what we now know, and here it is, and, you know, forget the disinformation. So, I hope that the name Prouty stands for, you know, honesty and research and truth. And here's what the facts are in this state. Yeah, that
sounds good. Yeah.
So donations. I hope people can, you know, make a financial donation to Black Op Radio. This is the kind of thing we're doing. We're planning some more. We're planning an answer to the 50 Reasons video series. There's going to be more from me and Jeff, and that's in the future. But, you know, some of these things take time to plan, and at least we're so thankful. I think we're getting over 500 hits a day to those videos, and Jeff said we're over 500,000 views.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, that's really good. That's
because it's been mirrored at several different sites, which we don't mind. You know, we don't make any money on it and all that, and we couldn't because we have footage and other things on there that we don't own. It's just there as an educational thing for if you want to know the facts. And of course, you know, there's different, you know, well, people have gone through them. I'm sure they know about them. They may not have seen them all, but they're you know, browse through and see which topic you like. They're labeled that way. You can browse through and find a topic that you're interested in.
Yeah, they're really good. Yeah, that was a worthwhile project for sure.
Well, I'm glad to support and promote your work, Greg. So
thank you so much.
Great. So we'll keep in touch, and just let me know if anything's new. Email me anytime.
I will, Len. Take care. Always good talking to you.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, good night.